Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from listeners and viewers like you, and organizations such as the Rita Allen Foundation, which invests in transformative ideas in their earliest stages to leverage their growth and promote breakthrough solutions to significant problems. Go to ritaallen.org to learn more.
Mapping the global landscape of civic science by dissecting new insights from researchers, practitioners, and leaders in academia, government, for-profit, and non-profit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Wei Ji Ma, it's absolutely fantastic to chat with you today.
Likewise.
So you are the founder of Growing Up in Science.
That's right.
And not only that, you're a professor here at NYU. Now, before I give it all away, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. My background is in theoretical physics. I got my PhD in that field a very long time ago. Then I switched to computational neuroscience. I did postdocs in computational neuroscience from 2002 to 2008. In the process, I also fell in love with experimental psychology. So I started doing human behavior experiments. And when I started my own lab at Baylor College of Medicine in 2008, I started doing a combination of those two things, computational neuroscience and cognitive psychology, or computational cognitive science. It's a good term. And I've been doing that since, and I came to NYU when I was like 5 years afterwards, so that's 2013, yeah.
See, so now growing up in science.
Yeah.
This is this initiative of yours, and I'm going to read what your website says, right? Sharing the unofficial, untold, and unconventional stories of people.
That's right.
Right? In science.
Yeah. Yeah, so the reason we started that is because there's always this gap between faculty and trainees, right? Where trainees often look up to faculty, or they're intimidated by them, or they see them as demigods who are categorically different from themselves. And that's just not good for their sense of belonging, right? As graduate students, they feel that this is, they're not in the same league almost, right? And at the same time, there's another problem, which is that there are lots of human factors that affect everyone, graduate students, postdocs, faculty, that have to do with struggles in your work, struggles in work-life balance, sometimes interpersonal issues within your work environment. And those topics are not typically talked about. And it's just incredibly important to open up that conversation for better understanding, mutual understanding, a greater sense of community and belonging again, and even people's mental health, better mental health. So Growing Up in Science hopes to take a small step in that direction by having faculty tell their candid life stories. And candid is really the key word. It is, you have to be open about what went wrong, your self-doubts, the obstacles you encountered. Sometimes the struggles are still going on. So that's something we also encourage openness about. And it's after that, there's a question and answer session. But what's important here is that the speaker gets to tell their story in a holistic way. It's not statistically representative or anything, because it's just an N of one, but it's narratively complete, right? The person can present the entirety of their life path and the choices they made, and the how the environment affected them. So it's sort of in a tradition of like narrative medicine or anthropology or histories almost.
Right. Probably similar to the story collider, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well, right?
Yeah.
But now you have, these are faculty members,
That's
right? Who are talking to who? Who are they talking to?
Mostly PhD students and postdocs, and sometimes research assistants, sometimes undergraduates, and occasionally fellow faculty.
Okay, and some of their talks are available online, right?
Yes, that's right. So we're lucky that many faculty at NYU were willing to share their stories, and we recorded them and put them online. And also this model has spread to other institutions, and they've started their own series and sometimes also made the talks.
Right, and I understand there are 18 chapters.
Yeah, around that. It's hard to keep track. So some of them
keep growing.
Sort of fizzled out during the pandemic, and others came up, so we'll see what the final count is. I don't know.
So you're doing something right then, right? You have 18 chapters.
Yeah,
right?
so there's definitely a need for this. I think this is universal. So when I get invited to give a scientific talk somewhere, I say I do this under the condition that I can also do a Grow Up in Science talk. Usually the Grow Up in Science talk is the more popular one and the more memorable one. I just did one in the University of Maryland. It was also very well received.
I see.
I think lots of scientific communities have they understand that these issues are important, but they don't have mechanisms in place to facilitate this conversation, right? And growing up in science is just one mechanism to do this, but it's been effective, right? Like in a place where there is such a serious, trainees will feel more comfortable sharing their own struggles with each other and maybe even with faculty. And hopefully that will open up doors to ways to improve their own community and well-being for everyone.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word effective, right?
Yeah.
So I want to take that apart a little bit. What do you mean by that? And what metrics are you tracking?
We've done some surveys here at NYU, and one of the questions is how beneficial has this been for yourself, right? And trainees were overwhelmingly positive about this.
And these are the ones who are delivering the story?
No,
or the ones who are receiving?
They're receiving.
Okay.
Receiving.
Okay.
Anecdotally, the people who are delivering the story, they also feel that it's cathartic because well, we know like in science, we sometimes have to keep up our facade, right? We have to say, okay, everything's been going well. If you're introduced as a speaker, it's going to be all your accomplishments and nothing about the backstory, right? Nothing about the struggle. And it's sometimes liberating for faculty to be able to talk freely about everything that went wrong, right?
Yeah.
There are similar initiatives like at Princeton, there was a professor who started a CV of failures, which is also very much in the same spirit.
Right.
But I think that a spoken narrative is even more powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we were talking about effectiveness, right? So
Yeah.
you're doing these surveys, right? There's some impact for those who are listening. Tell me more. What else are you seeing?
Yeah, so unfortunately we haven't kept up the survey, so that's something we should probably be doing. But at the time, which is a couple of years ago, students also felt that certain topics that were brought up in the Growing Up in Science narratives were important to them. And these kind of topics could be struggles of motivation, right? Like procrastination, imposter feelings, very, very common, very rarely talked about. Conflicts with your advisor, right? It's a tricky topic, but it happens a lot, and it's something that has to be openly discussed, right? Mentorship struggles more broadly. And this is often within Growing Up in Science, it comes up in the sense of the speaker bringing this up from their own history. But of course, many of those cases do resonate with current students.
Right. Because there's, the human element of science, right? It's prevalent. In fact, science is a human endeavor, really, at that point, right?
And we tend to overlook that.
Yeah, we overlook that, exactly. So actually, in your article, you mentioned this earlier, you had a 2017 science article.
Yeah.
And you said this thing that when you go to give a talk, you want to give this additional, like, let me tell you my story in science.
That's right. Yeah.
Growing up in science. Yeah. So most of them say yes to this?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I think that this has also been like a catalyst for others to start their own series, because they sort of see how the model could work and how it can benefit their community.
Yeah. Hence the 18 chapters and growing.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned earlier, so these stories can actually, and we were talking offline a little bit, that they go beyond just the faculty and students, that you see potential of them.
Yeah,
recently
I did this bootcamp for undergraduates, and I had PhD students who were instructors in the bootcamp tell their Growing Up in Science stories to the undergraduates who were taking the bootcamp. And so that's essentially just taking the model one level down in the academic ladder, and it was just as effective, if not more. Right? So in the feedback, we have extensive feedback from the undergraduates in that bootcamp, and they just said that the Growing Up in Science stories were so inspiring and powerful, and they could help them see that they could be there. They could pursue a path in research. And maybe before that, they had trouble seeing that. Right?
So maybe even more impactful, potentially, at an undergraduate level, and even perhaps even lower, right?
Absolutely. We could take this to K-12. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Like, it's ultimately about a sense of belonging, right? And a sense of belonging is also a really important factor in increasing access for underprivileged groups. And if we bring stories of PhD students or undergraduates to high schools or middle schools, then this is going to be impactful, right? It's there's already a lot of data that, like, bringing science into the classroom makes science more relatable and more accessible, or perceived to be more within reach. And And I think that the scientists telling their personal story is going to be an extra layer on top of that, right? The scientists won't just be talking about their science, but also about their life path as sort of an integral part of the visit.
Right. So you've been doing this for 5 years. The growing up in science.
Growing up in science started in 2014.
2014,
so
even longer.
It's 10 years, yeah, that's right.
So how have you kept it going?
Yeah.
And I ask this, and also ask this because there's a challenge of starting initiatives and keeping them going.
Yeah. So this doesn't need a lot of resources. It just needs a motivated organizer, like with many things, like what you do, right? So if you can convince somebody that it would be worthwhile to share their personal story, then they'll show up and they'll do it. And I've had very few people decline. I had a few people decline. It's somewhat funny because one person said, I don't want any students to emulate what I did. Made me even more curious. But the vast majority of faculty, they are very eager to do this.
Okay.
Of course, you also have to have a sufficient base that you don't have too frequent events and you run out of speakers.
Right.
But like the energy for this is, like, the momentum is great. Like it's there's a need for this in the community. Right? As scientists, we are always trained to talk about our science, extensively trained. But all the human factors, they have fallen by the wayside from the start of our formal training to our present occupation if we're working in science, right? And everybody who's introduced to this concept, they recognize that this is a huge gap, and it feels very natural to contribute to filling that gap. Yeah.
So what do you hope if the public is going to read these stories? And we should tell everyone that the structure of these stories, they're written also on your website, right? Yeah. People can search through. There's an unofficial part, which is sort of, unstructured. And then the official, which is the usual part you read in someone's bio, right? I went here, this school did this project.
Absolutely.
So in the sense of the public, what do you hope that they are able to get from this as they watch? Because some of these are videos, right? As well. What do you hope that they get from this? It's going to be either the same or different to what graduate students would think.
I think it's going to be related. So I think that demystifying science is important. Right? Demystifying science is important so that the public understands how science operates, don't have misunderstandings about that, also understand the amount of effort that scientists make to where they are now.
To the human side of it, right?
Exactly, the human side of it, exactly. And also the general public, also, of course, there are parents with kids, and having access to these kinds of stories might help them talk to their kids about potential careers in STEM for their kids. I mean, I don't need to tell you this. You're doing stories in science, right? So this is
it's an important piece of the puzzle. Exactly, so do you hope that also it would be bi-directional? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no. So absolutely. Eventually, we hope that members of the public would also, of course, eventually, I would hope that this would also increase access to science, right? So that this is an introduction. This is sort of an entry level step for kids to learn about careers in STEM and to feel that they might be in that same position as the graduate student or the faculty member that they...
Because the engagement part is important, right? So there's not just the faculty or student talking and telling their story, that you get the audience, right? The public or the community asking questions.
Absolutely,
back, right?
Absolutely. It's always, there's always a lot of questions. Now, of course, we don't want to, we want to recognize that people are sometimes uncomfortable asking these questions in public, right? But maybe it would open door to them reaching out to the speaker afterwards. There is something special about the spoken story, right? Like having a person in the room and having that face-to-face interaction would make it the most powerful. But that doesn't mean that if you were to watch a recording or maybe even read the written version of it, we're also working on a Growing Up Science book right now, is going to be ineffective, right? I still think it would be effective.
Why do scientists choose the CivicSciTV network?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, great question.
That's a good one.
That's a great question.
Oh, that's such a great question.
CivicSciTV. Top experts, great questions, new insights. Subscribe to the CivicSciTV network and hear from scholars and practitioners on how to navigate the latest insights from the world of civic science.
So let's do a hypothetical. Now
Yes.
you have unlimited funds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What would you do first?
Within growing up in science or more
Yes,
broadly?
within growing up in science.
I would say, sorry, I have to think about that. That's not a question I get a lot. I think I would try to make it easier for people at other institutions to start these same kinds of initiatives.
Okay.
Because I'm only one person and I'm based here, and there's lots of places I just will never be able to reach. And we have to count on right now people's personal initiative and goodwill to start these projects elsewhere. But I would say that a lot of it is about capacity building. Right? So we have to find people who are willing to run these kinds of initiatives long term in a wide variety of places, especially places where people are underserved and might not have easy access to science or scientists. And what's required to do that capacity building is some kind of fellowship or stipend for those who organize. And organizing work is important, takes time, and it's very, very rarely part of people's day job. Right? So I would probably use those funds to build a network of organizers across the globe.
Global, right?
Globally, but starting in the US because I'm here, in order to spread this model to places that will be receptive to it, allow those organizers to set up their own local networks, to connect with each other through regular Zoom meetings, to discuss what the challenges that they encountered in setting up these series and keeping them going. So I think a lot of it would be about giving stipends to organizers. And then if this becomes like embedded within broader K-12 outreach, let's say, then that would also require some additional funding in order to establish those partnerships, for example, honoraria for teachers who participate in this, maybe some materials.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking others who are in the space already. There's Skype scientists, actually Humans of New York. I'm curious about how they're doing it too, right? Integrating with them. But that's another piece of it, right? It's building partnerships, right?
Yes,
you mentioned capacity building. That includes partnerships.
Absolutely building partnerships. So there's, if you draw this more broadly to public engagement, there's so much going on here. And like Skype Sciences, I love that model too. They try to have a wide reach by doing everything online. I would probably have a little bit more of a local focus because I believe in sort of the special value of these face-to-face
because growing up in science is all, during pandemic it was called virtual, but now they're all in person.
They're always in person, except for the global online series, obviously. And that's to reach broader audiences, is places that don't have access to their own local series.
So what is the driving question that growing up in science is trying to answer, right? And I ask this in terms of, if you're writing an NSF, it's always framed from that perspective. What is the question driving this? Because that tells us a little bit about what you hope to see, right? So how do you frame it from that direction? What is that central question?
Does human stories increase belonging? I think that's what would be my central question.
For those who, those who are in science already, and actually for anybody.
Yeah,
okay,
both. Like
those who want to be in science.
That would be aim 1 and aim 2 if you wish. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, wow.
And it's something that as a community, we just haven't done a great job on, right? Like there's these fantastic initiatives. You also mentioned Storycollider earlier. But then there is sort of the traditional academia, which emphasizes publications, grants, and this permeates every level of training and academia. So PhD students, postdocs, and faculty are not encouraged to this kind of outreach. This is a very broad issue. It's not just limited to growing up in science, but all of these activities that benefit broader audiences are rarely encouraged, and that's a problem.
And do you think you're beginning to answer that question, or you're setting the foundation to answer that question?
Yeah, I diverted from the question. So I would say anecdotally, yes, but I would need hard data on that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean that's the part of the reason, right? This is like you now have this anecdotes, and you want to build on that, right?
Yeah.
You actually want to formally pursue this more
yes,
broadly.
yeah,
So I understand you're actually now thinking about NYU as this hub, also, right, for public engagement. Just a little bit about that. What's your thinking around that, and where is growing up in science going to fit into?
Yeah, so absolutely. So NYU is an urban university. We're in New York City. We have a lot of underserved communities in the city, and we have this opportunity to do something as scientists to reach out to underserved communities, to learn from them, to build long-term relationships. But this needs coordination. And what's happening now is that a PI would write an NSF grant, and then a few days before the deadline, they would write the broader impact section and say, okay, we're going to do some school visits. And that's problematic because that means that this is not well thought through. In many cases, it's not part of a broader structure. The wheel gets reinvented a lot, lots of waste of resources. Continuity is often missing. What if the grant ends or the PI loses interest? Then what happens to the relationship with the school? Okay? My idea is that at NYU, as such a big institution in New York City, we have to do this more systematically. Right? We have to centralize these efforts, make sure that everyone knows what others are doing. We have to build databases of NYU scientists who are doing this kind of work, our partners outside, the forms of the interactions, the potential for each relationship, and build in systems for training people who do outreach and public engagement, building incentive systems, and building evaluation systems, right? And all of that needs centralized resources.
Coordination. So that's kind of in the works right now, at least thinking about how to do that.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's something that I'm hoping to establish soon. I'm talking to my deans about it. They have shown initial interest. It also fits within a broader national trend. So the governing board of the National Science Foundation indicated that they're going to take broader impact more seriously, in part because of all these issues which are nationwide, right? So there is a drive from taxpayers to actually take public engagement more seriously.
Right.
And my pipe dream is that this also is going to start counting towards tenure and promotion, right? In an R1 institution, typically it's publications, grants, and maybe a little bit of teaching that counts, but outreach and public engagements are potentially I see them as sort of an essential part of who we are as an academic and should be rewarded. It also benefits institutions in very concrete ways.
Yeah, and there have been some reports that have hinted at that. In fact, in your Elman Prize speech, you talked about this.
Oh, you actually watched it. I had one audience member. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Curious, right? And all of that. And just to wrap up, Wei Ji, man, we can talk all day long. And in fact, this is just an opening.
Yes.
I always say this to my guests that we want to continue the conversation, right? It's an ongoing, it's an organism that's changing.
Absolutely.
Right? When you think about societal challenges right now, right? Whether it's AI, when you're thinking about climate change, how does what you're doing connect to that? Right? Because one of the questions could be, growing up in science is necessary. The question is it sufficient?
Right. So I actually realized I didn't answer the last part of your earlier question, which is how does growing up in science fit in? So growing up in science could be just one part of these public engagement efforts, right? Where every interaction that the scientist has with the general public or with the school could include some element that is personal storytelling.
I see.
And the new question is how would you relate this to sort of broader issues that
how does it fit here, if it does so?
I feel that with issues such as the climate crisis, it is very important to engage all stakeholders and to break out of the ivory tower, right? And creating more robust public engagement efforts is breaking out of the ivory tower, communicating science to the general public and to lawmakers and to nonprofit organizations. Another initiative that I have, which I'd like to include in sort of public engagement, is the Science Action and Advocacy Network. This is an organization that started at NYU in psychology and neuroscience, but it consists of scientists, often PhD students, doing pro bono science for environmental or social non-profit organizations. Okay. So these very simple things like literature reviews, writing knowledge briefs, data visualization.
Kind of like a clinic of some kind.
Exactly.
Like,
that is exactly it. Cool. Right? But that's common in law. Clinics are common in law. They're not common in science. Right? And it's just it's a model that can reach a different group of stakeholders, but also serve to bridge this big gap between academia and society. So I feel that for climate crisis, one very important thing is like what interventions are effective to get people to take action. Right? There's research on that, but policymakers need to be made aware of this. And those interventions can also be applied directly to the general public, like how effective is voting, how effective is writing a letter to your representative, compared to less effective things like recycling, for example.
Right. But then I want to bring it back to growing up in science.
Yes.
And tell me if I'm wrong by saying this, whether the human side of this, right? Let's say we're talking about climate change. That the community members really understanding the human side of the equation, who these scientists are, what they're trying to do, and how they got to be asking those questions, right? That could perhaps actually be a vehicle, because we talk about the science all day long, right?
Right.
But what about the human side of that equation? Thoughts on that?
So while like a lot of people in the US still have like a lot of respect for science, there's also distrust of science, right? And distrust of science can be mitigated by introducing scientists to the general public. And it shouldn't just be Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye. It can be ordinary scientists who maybe not celebrities, but everybody can participate in this. And I also feel that this could also be bi-directional or multi-directional, where scientists can be inspired by the issues that the general public actually wants to see addressed, right? And how scientists form their questions, you just mentioned that. Right now, it's very much driven by our personal interest, right? And the broader impact, societal impact, is an afterthought for many, including for myself. And I'd like to see that become more multi-directional, where questions in the community can inspire scientists to study them.
There's no better place to finish this conversation. Wei Ji, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for doing everything that you're doing.